Without objection.
Mr. President, a few weeks ago, I was asked to MC the Arizona Distinguished Young Women Scholarship Program. Now, during the self-expression portion of the evening meant to showcase how quickly these young women can think on their feet, the participants were asked the following question. If you were to live a day without rules and consequences and do something truly outrageous, what would it be? Remember, these are high school seniors. As I stood on stage and called on each young woman to respond to the question, Alexis from Tempe confidently took the microphone and said the following: I would fly to Washington, D.C., go to the United States Senate floor, and ask each senator this question: what do you plan to do about the national debt? Now, the audience roared its approval, and I was put on the spot. This is a topic that has received scant attention in this political season, this election season, but it was put front and center at a scholarship program. Now, we shouldn't be surprised at this. For every day that we adults continue our obsession over emails and birth certificates, for every day that we do that, these high school seniors recognize that we're spending $1.4 billion more than we're taking in. This will result in a near $500 billion deficit this year, which will be added to our burgeoning $19 trillion debt. They know this and understand this because this is the debt that they will be left with long after our political careers are over. Now, I've long believed that of the myriad problems that we face in this country, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation to infectious diseases to climate change to aging infrastructure to unaffordable health care, our looming debt and persistent deficit are our most urgent challenge. If we don't put our fiscal house in order and put ourselves on a sustainable fiscal path forward, we won't be able to address any of the problems and the challenges that I just listed. If we continue in our current state of denial, one day in the not-so-distant future, we will wake up and discover that the financial markets have already decided that we're no longer a good bet. When this happens, the low interest rates that have made our debt manageable over the past couple of years will begin an upward march. For every quarter point that interest rates go up, an additional $50 billion will be required annually just to service the debt. For every quarter point that interest rates go up. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that if we don't address our fiscal imbalance and interest rates return to where they have traditionally been, within a decade, nearly all of our discretionary budget will be swallowed up just with one item: paying interest on the debt. Think about that for a minute. How do we fight a war on terrorism without spending any money on national defense? That's part of our discretionary budget. How do we replace aging infrastructure when there's no money left after we've paid our monthly installment on our credit cards? Infectious disease-bearing mosquitoes won't stop at our borders out of concern for our fiscal predicament. Once national interest rates begin their inevitable rise, the control over our fiscal situation will pass from this body and from Congress and from the executive branch to our creditors. We will then enter an austerity cycle that will negatively impact the global economy, and it will worsen our own fiscal outlook. So, how do we avoid this gloomy picture? If we want to put ourselves on a sustainable fiscal path, we can't just nibble around the edges. Discretionary spending has been largely held in check over the past several years, but the retirement of the baby boomer generation has led to huge increases in our so-called entitlement programs. Discretionary spending represents an ever-shrinking percentage of our total spending. Now, putting ourselves on a sustainable fiscal path has to involve a grand bargain of sorts, like the one contemplated by the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility, Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, more commonly known as Simpson-Bowles. Of course, this outline will need to be updated to take into account the nearly $7 trillion of debt that has accumulated just in the past 6 years. But it's a good place to start. Now, it's tempting for both Republicans and Democrats to say, well, we'll deal with this debt problem if voters give us control of both chambers and the White House. Believe me when I tell you, this won't happen. No one party, Republican or Democrat, will take the political risk that is inherent to dealing with our debt problem. Not my party, not the party on the other side of the aisle. Midterm elections are never more than 2 years away. No, it will take buy-in from both parties. Both parties have to be willing to hold hands and jump together. With divided government over the past 6 years, we've had the conditions necessary for a long-term budget agreement, but we've lacked the political courage to get it done. We can't afford to squander that opportunity any longer. If the results of the November elections produce divided government once again in January, here's hoping that while we may publicly grumble, we'll privately see it as an opportunity to redeem ourselves as stewards of this institution and put the country back on a sustainable fiscal path. Mr. President, I ask unanimous